Okay, so I have been um, influenced to make this video due to a conversation about giving the land back to the Native Americans, right? And I would say that if you're going to do that, then it would have to be all indigenous people everywhere, which is a fine idea, right? But it's a very simple thing to say, give the land back. There's a lot of complicated maneuvering in that sentence. First of all, what does giving the land back mean? Does that mean that people who have settled over the past, whatever years, who had nothing to do personally with how we got to where we are now, have to pay, right? These people worked hard to save up money, to buy land, to buy homes for their families, right? So it's like, oh, that's cool that you paid all that money, but it's not yours anymore. And don't misunderstand me. The natives had their own suffrage, right? They didn't have a choice in the matter. So the feelings are valid in all of in the whole situation, right? It's not a easy situation to deal with, right? Because of the English only movement. Children were taken away from their parents. They were put into boarding schools. They were forced to learn Christianity. They were abused if they spoke their native language, right? Even parents, because they wanted their children to not have a disadvantage, prioritize their children learning English and not their native languages. And this goes beyond just the indigenous people. This goes to the African American community, the Mexican American community, the German American community. Like, there were a lot of cultures in America, before we got to now. At one point there was a whole state that spoke French. There was a lot of like German people. And German and French is not a is not a highly spoken language in America. So all those people lost their culture and lost their language, right? Because of the English only movement. California, for instance, which was owned by Mexican people, was technically taken illegally. I'm not going to say illegally, right? Questionably legally, because they made laws to where land deeds and things like that had to be in English. So the people who owned the land, either one, couldn't afford it, so had to sell their land, or two, had to pay attorneys extensive fees in order to translate all these documents. And by the time they did all that, they didn't have any money anyways. So when you give the land back, who do you give the land back to? There were many tribes. Speaking of the USA alone, there were many different tribes, and some are not even recognized by the United States of America. So how do you decide how to split up the land, the territories, right? Like, that alone is probably going to create conflict. Now, the idea of the land being communal, not owned by anybody, is great, but try to convince people who have settled and own homes and all the money that they've invested into that home just to donate their property. Where are they going to live? Their investment just became a debt. Now there are things that we can do, right? Land swapping, right? Like the reservation land that was quote unquote considered trash. I'm gonna just call it trash. Dry, arid, dusty, hot land that wasn't wanted. Oh, here's this land that we're giving you to as a gift. You could do a land swap, to where that land becomes government land, and then the land that the indigenous groups actually want, they could get over that. But that's still like an overtime thing. You're not gonna just wake up tomorrow and get that done. That is I want to say at least a 60-year long plan. Another thing you could do is give like land maintenance and curatorship back to the Native Americans, like public parks and things like that. And then instead of a county, right? Being in charge of maintaining the roads and zoning and anything having to do with land. The Native American, the tribes would be in charge of that, catering to the land, curating the land essentially. And the property taxes that go to the county, right, to contribute to the state taxes, those would then go to the tribes, right? And then the tribes, in order to maintain the system we have now, the tribes would have to probably take some of that off the top to do things that didn't have to do with land, such as money towards school, money towards firefighters, money towards maintaining, like water systems and things like that, some of the money from property taxes go to. But that is one thing you could do, right? Grant Native Americans certain privileges when it comes to like fishing, on land, and certain access to national parks, which are protected, because the government wants to take care of those. But, certain additional privileges on top of that. But as far as just making the land communal or violating people's privacy, that doesn't sound like a good idea to me. So it's like, give the land back to the people is simple, right? It's a simple, but there's so much more that goes into it, and there's so much more you have to think about it. Yeah, we have screwed up this land, but when I say we, I'm not talking about me, right? I didn't have anything to do with this, right? But we allowed people to do it. We gave power to corporations to do things, and those corporations either didn't know or lied about the way that their process was affecting the land, and we have polluted waters, right? Like mercury poisoning is a whole thing, and like high fashion industry, we are overproducing so much stuff we don't have anywhere to put it because we are profit mindset, that like we're ruining the waters, and we're polluting the water with chemicals, and we're polluting the land with trash. So there are things we can do, right? But then some things require a lot more. Like I said, if you do a land swap, then you have to get people to agree to this. And then the other thing too is, let's say you give curatorship to the tribe, right? And then the tribe gets property tax or whatever from the people who live there, right? What's to guarantee that the people that you're giving this money to aren't business mindset, right? I would argue that all of how do I put this? I would argue that there are some people of indigenous bloodline who do not necessarily share the values and spirituality of their ancestors, right? For instance, give the land back. What does that mean? Because the Native Americans saw the land as communal. They traveled based on weather. They moved, with the animals and the vegetation. So it's like, you want to make sure that you're not taking power from one entity and putting it into another entity that is going to do the same thing with it. So those are things that we have to think about. I don't have a right answer for anybody. The only thing that I say is that it's not a simple task. Just to say it out like it can happen tomorrow that's a simple way of putting it, but there's so much more that go into it. If you have any ideas or comments or things you feel like I didn't talk about, I am completely open to doing the research on those things and providing a proper response. Have a good day.